Hey, and welcome back to all my subscribers. By the way, if you are not a subscriber, I welcome you also, but what are you doing? Hit the subscribe button right now. I also want to thank everybody who has sent me things through the mail and through the online contribution form. Your prayers, your letters, your cards, your outpourings, your stories, these sustain me. And soon I will do another round where I read some letters because I think it helps keep everybody connected, makes us all feel less alone to know that there's other people out there from all walks of life, all geographic areas who are paying attention to what's happening and who have all kinds of unique and wonderful perspectives on it. So I'll do that soon. But let's get to this video today. I won't keep you waiting anymore. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about political ponerology, which is the science of the nature of evil adjusted for political purposes, a book by Andrew M. Lobachevsky. I'm going to talk about some concepts in there, some of the methods that helps the ponerological process, or the process of evil, subversion of institutions, people, governments. I'm going to talk about some of the methods, and then later I'm going to give more in-depth examples of this, of how I see it all playing out. Obviously, it's not exhaustive. This is just an overview. Because I can't cover it all, you have to read the whole book to get it. But let's start here with the concepts of conversive thinking, pathological egotism, moralizing interpretation, paramoralism, reversive blockades, information selection and substitution, and spellbinders. Now, I want to say all of those are very complicated words, and I don't think, immediately bring anything visceral to mind. They sound pretty boring. But in my opinion, all of this sciencing, all of this psychologizing, these are attempts to redefine what religion and faith already described to us ages ago. Since we kind of, in our quest for progress and scientific knowledge and rationalism and materialism, we wanted to get rid of those things which we thought of as tribal and primitive. But in all honesty, and I've been studying this stuff for years and years now from various angles, I believe that the religious interpretation and words and concepts and stories surrounding the battle between good and evil, these are the most useful. But for the sake of our society, and in the hopes of getting more people to understand this extremely important aspect of our lives, our societies, and our cultures, I'm going to try to use the scientific and psychological verbiage presented in this book. All right, I'm going to start with spellbinders because these are the spokespeople. This is the main conduit by which evil permeates a system. The spellbinders. In religion, we might call them sorcerers or false prophets. In Event 201 planning and NGO circles, they call them storytellers, they call them key opinion leaders, and they call them trusted voices. These are all the same things, in my opinion, as spellbinders. So let's look at what Andrew Lobachevsky talks about when he talks about spellbinders. First of all, he says, the practical value of our worldview ends where the psychopath enters. And he says that naivete is used by the psychopath. And what he means is that people tend not to educate themselves on pathology in the human mind, in the human psyche. They don't want to know it. And because it's very different from how they are as a normal person with a normal conscience and a normal mind, they dismiss it, they overlook it, they think it's the stuff of movies, monsters and vampires, and they don't take it as seriously as they should. They might look at serial killers and understand that, like the acts of one twisted individual, but they don't understand those same twisted individuals when they are working in official capacities. They somehow don't believe that a psychopath could rise to the level of a corporate leader or a government leader, and they particularly don't believe that there could be many psychopaths or sociopaths or evil people within the medical system or the teaching profession or governments, bureaucracies. They just refuse to believe it. And that's the naivete that the psychopaths feed on and use towards their own ends. Okay, so spellbinders are mouthpieces, celebrities, experts, leaders, trusted voices, key opinion leaders. Spellbinders lead normal, naive people away from the core of whatever issue it is that they are representing, whether they be someone like, Anthony Fauci, who always is talking so much, so fast, appearing everywhere, that he keeps people from digging deeper and seeing the deeper truths behind the lies. He says, Lobaczewski says, spellbinders employ paralogisms, which is perverted logic, paramoralisms, which is perverted moral and ethics thinking, conversive thinking, and they induce people into a reversive blockade, which causes them to switch off or be triggered by certain info or phrases. And that makes the people begin a process called information selection and suppression. We're going to get to all of this deeper in a minute so that it's more understandable. Okay, if logical thinking and common sense are not retaught to the general public who have been subjected to too many spellbinders, then the person becomes unable to reason or see the truth at all, even when the truth would be beneficial to them. They just cannot do it. This is the same process in the Bible as the strong delusion. This is the same thing that, in my opinion, Andrew Lobaczewski is describing here. At some point, when you reject the truth enough, you can no longer see it. The overall effect is that the previously normal person, now warped by the spellbinder, becomes totally dependent on and obedient to him or her, rejecting outside influences and facts. And now think, in the age of the 24/7 news cycle, social media and censorship, spellbinding has become all-pervasive. Oftentimes, the spellbinder is working for himself or herself, but in our society, we have many spellbinders who appear to be working for a larger agenda. Those last two paragraphs there were just my thoughts on the whole thing. But it is important. I just keep coming back to Fauci, but there's so many of them. All the celebrities that are going around saying we're all in this together. Remember all that with Lady Gaga at the beginning, and now we've come down to them pretending to get the vaccine, or maybe really getting the vaccine and putting it on social media. These are spellbinding techniques. What's next after spellbinder? The concept of conversive thinking. Conversive thinking is using terms but giving them opposing or twisted meanings. Examples: peacefulness equals appeasement. Freedom equals license. Initiative equals arbitrariness. Traditional equals backward. Rally equals mob. And some of them are really applicable today. Like, you notice how they'll switch between saying something is a rally or a mob depending on the political side that is out in the streets. If it's BLM, it's a rally and it's peaceful. And if it's conservatives of any sort or anti-lockdown people, it's a mob. It should be stopped. These examples of conversive thinking are everywhere now. They've redefined words so that when they use it, they mean the opposite of what normal people think it means. Racism is a good one, is a really big one. And then there's all kinds of others I've noted here. Stand together by standing apart. That is just a mind-breaking contradiction. Inclusive really means exclusive and segregation now, if you've noticed. The label Antifa, which they say means anti-fascist, is used to cover up for violent fascist activities. Euthanasia is freedom from pain, and it's compassionate. Killing people is compassionate, and it's harmless, and it's good for society. And of course, I've got other examples here, but I'm sure you can think of your own. The next concept we were going to look up is pathological ego. The author calls excessive egotism the king of all faults. He says it's always found in the hysterical, histrionic personality type. He says pathological egotists are incapable of bringing on board new ideas, contradictory evidence, or contrary opinions, and are incapable of something called positive disintegration, which means, essentially, as I understand it, normal people have a conscience which occasionally will cause them to feel extremely depressed or sad or despondent or guilty or hopeless. And we call this now depression. We have pathologized all kinds of negative emotions, and the pharma industry and the medical industrial complex wants us to believe there's something wrong with us if we have attacks of conscience. Whether that is profound sadness over something or guilt or shame over something. While I agree we can get lost in those emotions, I also believe that they can be catalysts for individual growth. You have to sit with your negative emotions. And full disclosure, when I was younger, I did take antidepressants for a while. I believed all of this. I believed there was something wrong with my chemistry if I was sad or depressed. But that practice ended a long time ago, and I've learned that if you just go through the fire, you come out a stronger person in the end. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's a growth process. It makes you reflect on what you've done, your attitudes, how you could improve. It spurs you sometimes, if you let it, to action. And it's like forging a knife in the fire. It's forging steel in the fire, right? You're stronger and stronger. So pathological egotists will not do this. They want to rid anyone who contradicts them. They will not take on board new information, and they certainly won't sit with their negative feelings so that they can come out the other end a stronger, better, more knowledgeable person. In the book, Andrew Lowaszewski says that people who must deal with pathological egotists are left confused, and the whole system they're in gets thrown into conflict. They find themselves asking such things as, how does this make any sense? What could he or she possibly hope to gain by taking this action? And this is where our naivete comes in again. We will try to make excuses for this instead of just understanding that this person is broken, and for all intents and purposes, they're evil. They're a corrupting influence. They're going to wreck everything, sometimes very important things like whole hospitals and whole public health institutions, for example, if you know what I mean. Yeah, and because once again, I can't help but think of Anthony Fauci, who was clearly, I would say, groomed to be a pathological egotist. He, tiny little Anthony Fauci, was captain of his basketball team in school. Who made that decision? That's crazy. And here he is. Who can forget Anthony Fauci throwing out the first pitch here? You see the ball? You see where he threw it? And he had no shame about that. I don't think he even joked about it. Like, oh, that was terrible. I think he just walked off proud as peacock that he got to do that, and that was the end of the story. He dared anybody to say how terrible it was. Right? On to the next concept. Moralizing interpretation. What he means is that we put our morals on people, which makes us think, well, it gives us the situational room to explain away behaviors. So Lowaszewski writes that we err between the moral evil and biological evil. Remember, Lowaszewski thinks that evil people are suffering from a brain injury due to usually childhood trauma or illness, which he gets into quite heavily in the beginning parts of this book. So he says, if you use moralizing. You're using cultural norms to assess actions. And when we do this, we fail to appreciate the role of the deviant character. You see how moralizing will take it away from the person and put it into a societal context? The truth of the matter is, though, that this person, wherever they might be in the world, whatever society, they would still be deviant. So it is an important distinction, I think. He says that we may consider this error of moralizing interpretation to be a permanent error of public opinion. That we as societies make these excuses for people all the time. Situational ethics. He says that there is a prevalence for this line of thought in young people, which makes sense. They don't know as much. They don't have as much experience. Less cultured people, which I kind of take issue with depending on what he means, and in traditional aesthetes, which is funny and true. I said I wanted to read page 71, moralizing and detection of pathology, minimizing, because exposure to twisted thinking has a severe, long-lasting effect on the normal people who are exposed to it, especially when done in a space such as a school, for example, or courts of law, that society has deemed to be upright and correct. So here's page 71. Every person in the span of his life, and particularly during childhood and youth, assimilates psychological material from others through mental resonance, identification, imitation, and other communicative means, thereupon transforming it to build his own personality and worldview. If such material is contaminated by pathological factors and deformities, personality development shall also be deformed. The product will be a person unable to understand correctly either himself or others, normal human relations and morals. He develops into a person who commits evil acts with a poor feeling of being faulty. Is he really at fault? Okay, that's a long way, I believe, of describing the process of grooming. Slowly warping a person's sense of morals, sense of logic, understanding of the world, until it kind of becomes second nature, first nature maybe, for them to be immoral, to lack a conscience, and to do things that society previously rejected as bad. It's how they were groomed, it's how they were brought up. And so then, an example for me, one among many, many, I'm sure some sprung to your mind as you heard me reading, is the phenomenon of teaching gender ideology in schools. Now, this is a Twitter user whose whole life is dedicated to trying to wrestle this out of the hands of public education, trying to save children from the predatory and evil influence of this gender ideology. So one of the things he did was he had received from a parent of a child in grade 7 a recording of a guy who had come in to lecture the class on gender studies and gender ideology. And in that recording, we find this quote-unquote expert in gender telling the kids that the kids are smarter than the grandparents when it comes to gender. And this is obviously a way to drive a wedge between family and child, which to me is exceptionally evil. On his Twitter account, Elston further criticized the class, at one point writing, "It's not enough just to be a kind kid. They have to be activists fighting for social justice, scoring woke points. Great indoctrination." I agree. I mean, so they're going in there saying there's not only two genders, old people don't understand this, you're really smart, and here's a little bit of sex education for you, and they just go way too far. To me, that is an example of what is being described here, I believe. Pathological grooming, so that you get a whole new generation of people who can either be spellbinders or are easily tricked by the spellbinders into believing things that aren't true, into warped morality, into warped logic and reasoning. The next thing is the paramoralism. This is when you use words and arguments and explanations to prove something is moral, quote unquote prove, when it isn't Often, the spellbinders will frame a subject in terms of ethics, but their purpose is to disguise the ethical problems associated with it. And it's very situational. They can change their arguments on a dime depending on the topic they are addressing. Think once again of the difference between how they treat Antifa, rioting, and BLM, rioting and looting, and how they treat rallies that are peaceful protests against governments, against corporations. They control the frame. They cast one as moral and one as immoral. But there's way more serious examples than that. Think of arguments, again, for euthanasia, for abortion, for segregation, even for what I think is modern-day eugenics. Now just look at all the paramoralisms put forth by this guy, Ezekiel Emanuel, who was Obama's a health advisor. They called him the rationer-in-chief because he came up with a system which puts more value on people depending on their age and abilities. Like, if you're going to have scarce health care, he's picked the people who should receive it and then leave the other guys off the other end. In order to put forward such a policy, in the past, the guy would have been run out of town on a rail, right? So he's come up with paramoralisms that make it sound like this is a good thing, when really it's just psychotic evil, in my own opinion. Because we don't have to triage the whole world. There is enough to go around. By the way, he's very active now again with the pandemic because, we have to ration care again now because there's a pandemic. Nobody can see this pandemic, but apparently it's there. So Ezekiel Emanuel is all the rage again. Here's what he basically argues. In order to make such decisions about the allocation of medical care, the focus cannot be only on the worth of the individual. He proposes adding the communitarian perspective to ensure that medical resources will be allocated in a way that keeps society going. Quote, substantively, it suggests services that promote the continuation of the polity, those that ensure healthy future generations, ensure development of practical reasoning skills, and ensure full and active participation by citizens in public deliberations, are to be socially guaranteed as basic. But covering services to provide to individuals who are irreversibly prevented from being or becoming participating citizens are not basic and should not be guaranteed. An obvious example is not guaranteeing health services to patients with dementia. Now, you see, he's put it in such convoluted language, but it's an exact replica of the eugenics policies of the eugenicists back before and during the Second World War. He wants to guarantee services only to people whose survival would ensure healthy future generations and the development of practical reasoning skills, full and active participation by citizens. So, does this mean dumb people wouldn't get it? And disabled people wouldn't get it? People with genetic defects, quote unquote, wouldn't get the medical care? It's exactly eugenics. Just to show you that I'm not exaggerating, you should have a read of this entire paper. It's not very long, Nazi Medicine and Research on Human Beings, where the author here talks about what happened to allow people to get to the point where they thought eugenics was a good idea. And he says, 2 features of the Nazi period are crucial for understanding the specific forms of research on human beings undertaken then: the totalitarian political system and the broader paradigm of racial hygiene, eugenics, which was not solely the result of the Nazi political system, but rather a social movement that drew on concepts created by understandings of contemporary biology. Its origins precede the beginnings of the Nazi Party by more than 2 decades. But the autocratic political system and the program of racial hygiene reinforced each other and contributed to specific questions to be addressed by the medical sciences and to a setting in which no ethical or legal regulations existed. This combination of factors created the conditions for research to be undertaken that would not otherwise have been possible. Okay? We're in such a situation now. A specific totalitarian autocratic system and conditions which allow medical experimentation because it's a big emergency. Pardon me. I'd have a drink. I just want to continue with a little bit more. Rassenhygiene, a German equivalent for eugenics, was perceived as an applied science founded on the laws of genetics and as essential for improving the health of the Volk, or race. It was thought to provide long-term preventive measures against defects in the human genetic material, complementing individual hygiene. Central to racial hygiene was biological determinism, the view that humans live and behave as they do by virtue of their biological constitution and ultimately their genes. Now, tell me, doesn't that remind you of what I just read from Ezekiel Emanuel, where he's saying that this practice, this communitarian medical practice, can help us ensure healthy future generations and ensure the development of practical reasoning skills and ensure full and active participation by citizens in public deliberations. Same exact thing. The other thing that helped the Nazi eugenic policy be accepted was that resources for genetic research had increased considerably since the mid-1920s, with a further boost in 1933 onwards. As a result, more and more scientists framed their research projects in terms of genetics and claimed their work could contribute to establishing the criteria that differentiated inherited diseases from acquired diseases. And down here it says, in the context of the Second World War, they had unlimited access to unconsenting people who were defined as biologically inferior. So the research program was accompanied by complete disregard for the victims, and many cruelties ensued. We have that situation as well. It may have begun in earnest with Obama's BRAIN initiative. You'd have to look that up. There was tens of billions, I think $30-something billion given over to brain research. And if you follow that money, it was given to a lot of people doing brain-computer interface work and different sort of mapping of the brain projects. And they frame all of that in terms of genetics as well. Now we're talking about people like Charles Lieber and the people Jeffrey Epstein funded. George Church with CRISPR, Martin Novak from Harvard, who has just gotten in trouble, gang of people at MIT. A lot of these people are wrapped up in the Epstein thing. So they're framing their research in terms of genetics. A huge influx of money came into the field. And they had a whole bunch of unwilling participants that they could experiment on in the Second World War. We have both of those conditions right now too. Look at the deaths in the long-term care homes, and we weren't allowed to visit them. We weren't allowed to know what was going on there. Those are, for all intents and purposes, unconsenting human subjects. We don't know what happened to them. Many of them had dementia. How could they consent? And in Canada, Canada's the worst country in the world. Of all of our COVID deaths, 81% were in long-term care homes. And now we've got our health officials in my province of Ontario announcing just yesterday a new emergency measure to allow hospitals to transfer patients to long-term care or retirement homes without their consent, to make space for the supposed influx of COVID patients. Gee, where did we hear this before? This is an exact repeat of the total murderous fiasco that Andrew Cuomo did at the beginning of COVID. I wonder if he was influenced by Ezekiel Emanuel. Either way, do Ontario's health officials not know about any of this? Is that what they're going to claim, that they don't ever watch the mainstream news, so they're unaware that this has already been tried in New York State with all of those dead deaths of people in long-term care facilities because they were transferred out of hospitals to make room for supposed COVID patients? Are these people that incompetent, do you think? Or are they evil? Are they being subject to ponerological process which has warped their thinking and blocked their ability to take on board any information which contradicts their preferred course of action? I don't know the answer. Okay. Here's something else that the spellbinders do, according to Andrew Lobachevsky in Political Ponerology. They instill a reversive blockade, emphatically insisting upon something which is the opposite of the truth, blocks the average person's mind from perceiving the truth. In accordance with the dictates of healthy common sense, the person starts searching for meaning in the golden mean between the truth and its opposite, winding up with some satisfactory counterfeit. People who think like this do not realize that this effect is precisely the intent of the person who subjects them to this method. What they want is people to look for this golden mean. You hear people say, well, there's his side and your side, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Well, that the whole of society is that dynamic right now. And that's what the spellbinders do. They repeat their lies so often that normal people who are naive, who don't know anything about this psychological manipulation, who don't believe governments or public health people are capable of being evil liars, they say, well, it's got to at least be partly true. And so from that belief, we get things like lockdowns and vicious masking rules. And we get people terrified to send their kids to school or to gather with their loved ones or hug their grandmas. From a compromise between the truth and an outrageous lie. Because they're not brave enough or smart enough or whatever it is to go all the way back to the real truth. And they're too slothful to look up for themselves to see who is telling the truth and who is lying. I've had people say to me, look, you've got to be wrong. And I'll say, have you looked into it? And they'll say, no. And I'll say, well, I have. I've spent years researching this deeply. Here, let me show you. No, I don't pay attention to any of that stuff, they'll say. And I'm like, okay, you don't pay attention to any of it, but you're positive I'm wrong. It's a reversive blockade, which leads to the next thing. If you have this reversive blockade, you end up with the next phase, which is information selection and substitution. What happens is people block their own reasoning processes due to years of priming, grooming, and being trained to reject certain types of info, certain words, images, memories even, etc. Think of the word conspiracy theory. Think of how they slap that label on things. They just now group everything under it. So do normal people. If they just hear the word conspiracy, they reject it. But Lobachevsky claims that this whole process expands and intensifies inside of a person in such a way that even similar words or concepts will be grouped under the rejected category. They will themselves start assigning the conspiracy label onto things that remind them of the original item which triggered this feedback loop. People do this because they want a comfortable conclusion. They don't want confrontation. They want to go back into their hidey holes. They want to explain things away, right? It's like a little child pulling the covers over their head when they think there's a monster in the closet. For some reason, they believe if I can't see him, he won't be able to see me. It's the adult equivalent. That's what this information selection and substitution is. Eventually, it gets so bad that people will block out information, even if that information would help them. For example, have you tried to calm anybody's fear about COVID-19? They are to the point where they want to be afraid. You're trying to talk them down from their panic, but they want to be in their panic. It's really, really sad. All right, so we've covered all of these things now. And I just want to ask, in the end, who are the spellbinders working for? What agenda are they pushing? There's often spellbinders who are just, say, used car salesmen and they want to grow their business. And they're working for themselves. But in today's day and age, there's spellbinders everywhere. And I can name you, and you can probably name them yourself, the ones that clearly are all in this public health realm together. They constantly appear and reappear. Lady Gaga, Chrissy Teigen, Ellen DeGeneres, Robert De Niro. And then, of course, we've got the big daddies, Bill Gates. We've got Anthony Fauci. In Canada, we've got Theresa Tam and Bonnie Henry. Bonnie Henry, it was clear they groomed this woman to be a spellbinder. Look at all these news stories. You can pause and look if you want. They made shoes in her honor. They made murals in her honor. She's written books, and they gave her a great big book advance deal. And this is how they try to create celebrity around people to make them effective spellbinders. But who are they working for? Well, I just want to bring you back to Ezekiel Emanuel, the health rationer guy. Did you know he partnered with a woman named Christine Grady on writing this paper, 4 Paradigms of Clinical Research and Research Oversight? This is all about bioethics and the eras of bioethics that we have passed through and where we are now. I want to tell you that Christine Grady is the wife of Anthony Fauci. She's the wife of Anthony Fauci, and she is the head of bioethics and human subjects research at the National Institute of Health. So she works as a partner with Ezekiel Emanuel. And here's what they say. These are the eras that we've passed through, according to Christine Grady and Ezekiel Emanuel, in terms of bioethics. And you see here from the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s, it's called an era of participant access, where we had individual autonomy as the key protection. Underlying philosophy of that era was individual rights-based theory. Highlighted ethical principle of that era was informed consent. This is in the past, according to them. From the mid-1990s onward, we're now in an era of community partnership, where the key protection is the host community collaboration. The underlying philosophy is communitarianism, and the highlighted ethical principle is collaborative partnership. We've done away with informed consent and individual rights-based theory in favor of communitarianism. And if you remember, Ezekiel Emanuel described his communitarian health philosophy as being one that keeps society going, which, if you remember, was very similar to the Nazi concept of eugenics called Rassenhygiene. Only the best people survive. Now, I have some other examples here, but this video has gotten a little long. The one thing I do want to mention before I go, I'll point out here in Kate Wan's excellent article called Canada's COVID Coup, that one of the World Health Organization's and Canadian Catherine Hankins' papers, she wrote, informed consent must be supported by sensitivity to power imbalances and locally appropriate materials. For example, she wants to consider local definitions of the word minor, and they want to move beyond conventional indications of consent. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what I think it means. I think it means eugenics is back on the table. And for some confirmation of this, I want you to consider the fact that these woke corporations and these woke celebrities keep talking about how they want to aim all of these vaccines at people of color and communities of color and indigenous people and women. And I'm surprised they haven't gone after homosexuals in some way. But they're saying they want to get these guys the vaccinations first. They haven't really given a good reason for it, have they? Consider this, that they don't want to tell you. There's a doctor in Canada, Dr. Charles Hoff, who works in an area of British Columbia that has a high Indigenous First Nations people concentration. A lot of his patients are First Nations, and they were prioritized for the vaccine. So he's given the vaccine, and he has reported an extraordinarily high percentage of people getting the vaccine having serious adverse reactions. One of his patients died. 3 others are probably permanently disabled from it. And there's more who have had other adverse events. He's only given out something like 900 vaccines. So look at that proportion. Dr. Hoff is a good man. He saw this and he was alarmed, and he wrote letters to all the appropriate people. He sent warnings. And what happened? He got berated, threatened, criticized, silenced. And the public health officials, of course, didn't take his advice, didn't heed his warnings. Where's their concern for the Indigenous population? Why are they targeting those people, especially now, after they see that there was a very high proportion of people that had adverse events after vaccination in that particular racial category? Are they serious about their wokeness, or is it just a cover? Is it a paramoralism? I'm thinking that the ponerological process, using all of these means to warp the thinking of society, to actually prevent them from absorbing true information over the course of many years, I believe that it has allowed the eugenicists to sneak back into full operation. And the public is so mind-bent that they cannot see it for what it is. They put rainbows on it. They call it social justice. And meanwhile, the people they always wanted to target back in Nazi days are the ones they're targeting now. All right. I will wrap it up here. I'll stop talking. Please don't forget to go to my website, amazingpolly.net. And if you'd like to support my work, you can do so there on the online form, or send me something through the mail. I love getting mail. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And don't forget to spread the videos. P.S. There's somebody on YouTube now that has started a channel called Amazing Polly News, where they're uploading a lot of my videos. I don't object. It's okay. But don't be fooled. That is not me. That is not me. I've seen them answering some comments, and they're not indicating that they're not me, but they're not me. Okay? All right. I've been talking so much, I've completely lost my place. I hope this was informative for you. Check the description box for references. I will leave them there. And also consider my point at the beginning, that there's already a system for understanding the process of evil infiltrating and warping people, cultures, societies, nations. There's already a great book about that, and it's called the Bible. So look there also for resources on how to fight it. I recommend Derek Prince's ministries on witchcraft and the end times, fighting and recognizing our real enemy. Fantastic stuff. I love those sermons and lectures. Okay, zip it, Polly. Until next time, everybody. Peace out.